I think that Ghost might be the best type in the game because there are no bad Ghost type Pokemon. There are so many Pokemon out there that you would think that finding just 10 of any type that would be bad would be easy. It's not only not easy, it's impossible for this type specifically. This has implications for this video, but I'll explain why this is the case first. Ghost is overall just a really strong type. It's the only type to give you 2 different immunities, and also there aren't that many types that resist it, and so both offensively and defensively, it has a lot of utility. Here's the other thing though. As more and more Pokemon games have come out, the developers have gotten better at making Pokemon, or I should say they've gotten better at making Pokemon with competitive play in mind, which is what I'm talking about here. And so in this series, what I have found is that many of the worst Pokemon of a given type are Pokemon from earlier generations. However, there aren't a lot of Ghost types in the earlier generations. Generation 1 only has one evolutionary line that is Ghost type, and that is Gengar. And Gengar is the single best Ghost type Pokemon, certainly not the worst. Generation 2 only has Misdreavus and Mismagius. And while Mismagius might not be the most impressive Pokemon, Misdreavus actually got second at US Nationals back in 2013, and therefore I cannot put it on this list. To be explicit about it, for this list I only consider the best Pokemon in each evolutionary line. And so with the earlier generations just not having that many Ghost types present at all, and the later generations having better designed Ghost types, it puts us in a very unique situation here, which is why for the first time ever on one of these lists, I am not able to talk about 10 Pokemon. In fact, there are only 8 Pokemon that I can talk about here. And frankly, none of them are bad. You could bring any of these Pokemon to a tournament, and while they wouldn't be commonplace, like you wouldn't be doing yourself a massive disservice. I'm genuinely being serious when I say that there are no bad Ghost types. It's actually, I can't even believe it. I've never seen anything like this. To compensate for only having 8 Pokemon on the list rather than the normal 10, the honorable mention section is going to be longer, and I will explain why a lot of Ghost types that look bad are actually not like valid to be put on this list. But we'll get to that later, because first of all, we have to talk about our 8th worst Ghost type, which is the best Ghost type on the worst Ghost type list, Dhelmise. Dhelmise is a great Pokemon. Dhelmise is one of the Pokemon that looks the least like a Pokemon. I think this is largely because the place where its eye is not super obvious. Looking at it, like it kind of just looks like an anchor, and while if you look closely, you can see that it does have an eye. It's really not apparent at first glance, and so it looks more like an object than a Pokemon. But those are just my personal feelings. For this list, I'm only considering how good a Pokemon is competitively. The thing about Dhelmise is that it actually has a lot going for it. Grass and Ghost typing is surprisingly a type that they really favor for some reason. Dhelmise was introduced in Generation 7, which is kind of funny because the generation prior introduced both Gourgeist and Trevenant, which are Pokemon that share a typing and also like a similar stat distribution to Dhelmise. So I don't know why they like just love these slow grass ghost Pokemon, but I mean, it is a pretty cool typing. They don't have that much explicit synergy, but because both grass and ghost offer utility, with ghost making you immune to 2 different types and grass making you immune to powder moves, I would say that overall it's a pretty nice combination. The coolest thing about Dhelmise is its ability. It gets the ability Steelworker, which powers up all of its steel type moves by 50%. For those of you really familiar with competitive Pokemon, this effectively gives it a 3rd same type attack bonus, or stab type, meaning it can use all of grass, ghost, and steel moves quite effectively offensively. One thing you might not know is that Dhelmise actually gets a signature move called Anchor Shot, which is a steel type move that when it hits the target prevents them from switching out. This is a really great move. Steel is a pretty nice offensive type to have, and also like not letting your opponent switch out. I like that personally. I think that's nice. It gives a number of other really high power attacks and high utility attacks, mostly Power Whip and Poltergeist, but also gets Grassy Glide. Overall, a decent move pool for sure. Dhelmise also has pretty good stats. It's like decently bulky. I would say it's above average bulky, and it has a very high attack stat, especially for a Pokemon introduced in Generation 7 that's not a legendary or anything. Overall, I'm really just saying good things about Dhelmise. The thing that holds it back and the reason why it hasn't really seen any mainstream success is the fact that it is extremely slow. It has a base speed of 40, and it was introduced in the Incineroar generation, and like while it is a grass and ghost and effectively steel type offensively, not one of those types can do even neutral damage to Incineroar. And so despite being a Pokemon with a ton going for it, it's just kind of awkward to use, because in order to actually get use out of it, you really want it to be fighting inside of Trick Room. However, Incineroar is generally one of the strongest Pokemon against Trick Room, and if you want to dedicate a Pokemon to only doing damage inside of Trick Room, you want it to be a Pokemon that can actually match up well into Incineroar. So I would say that Dhelmise is yet another victim of the cat. That being said, it's a really cool Pokemon, and I was going to tell you that, I was sure that if Incineroar wasn't around, then maybe Dhelmise could see success, but that's actually already happened. It was actually used by a very well-known player by the name of Ashton Cox to place top 16 at a regional at the beginning of Sword and Shield. Importantly, this was before Incineroar was in the game. Ashton had Jellicent on the team, and while I don't have a full team report in front of me, I'm pretty sure that this was a hybrid Trick Room team, like not a dedicated one, but one that had the option. And so the fact that it already has a very good performance at a regional, I think indicates how good Dhelmise is. You can indicate how good you are if you subscribe to this channel. Did you know that there's over 40 people who work on this channel in some capacity? That's not all people who, spend like 40 hours a week or anything close to it, but yeah, yeah, it's a lot of us trying to make these little videos, you know. I at some point would be interested to make a video kind of showing the behind the scenes of running a channel that puts out videos that are this edited and this, you know, prepared every week, because like I think it's probably not super obvious. Actually, I'm curious if people watching have a guess as to how long it takes each video to be made and how many like hours go into it. But anyway, there was a lot of people who spent a lot of time and energy thinking about it and trying to make these videos good. So if you like the content or you want to support us, it's a good reason to subscribe. I personally feel like the most important thing as a YouTuber is to not betray the trust of your audience. So I do give you my word that I will always try and upload videos that I personally think are high quality and worth your time. Anyway, let's move on to number 7, which is Cursola. Some of you do not know that this Pokemon exists. So here's the thing about Cursola. Cursola is a Pokemon that is not super good. And initially when I was making my list, I actually had it lower down, like closer to 1 than 8. Cursola is an evolution of the Pokemon Galarian Corsola. It has really high special defense and special attack, but its physical bulk and HP stats are quite low, as is its speed stat. Basically, because its HP is so low, it doesn't feel as bulky as it should given how high its special defense is, and given how slow it is, it doesn't actually feel like as strong a special attacker as it could given how high its special attack is. Not having a secondary type also doesn't help, as like, yeah, when you're an offensive Pokemon, you want more types most of the time. The best way that I can communicate to you that Cursola is not a very good Pokemon is its ability is called Perish Body. I am not making this up for the video. This is real. You can look it up. Perish Body is a very cool ability that says if a Pokemon makes contact with the user of Perish Body, ability wielder of Perish Body, both the Pokemon who hit it and both Cursola and the attacking Pokemon will get a Perish counter put on them starting at 3. Many of you know that Perish Song strategies are my single favorite in the entire game, and yet despite that, I have never had a team with Cursola on it because it is just so difficult to use. This ability actually has pretty major anti-synergy with Cursola's stats because the majority of contact moves are physical attacks. There are some exceptions, like Grass Knot makes contact. Most of them are like punching and slapping and biting moves, right? And Cursola has such bad physical defense that it isn't actually able to make good use of this ability. I know that how I've described Cursola has made it seem bad. So you might be wondering why it's not lower on the list when I said that there aren't any like bad ghost type Pokemon. The reason is that for this video, I'm considering the entire evolutionary line. And while Cursola itself is not very good, Galarian Corsola is better. Galarian Corsola stats are actually very different. It's a lot weaker offensively, but it's also a lot bulkier. While its special defense is technically a fair bit lower, its physical defense is a lot higher and its HP remains the same. Unevolved Pokemon can hold the Eviolite item, which increases both of their defensive stats by 50%, and Eviolite Galarian Corsola is extremely bulky and also gets healing moves like Strength Sap. This is a Pokemon that I think was especially strong in single battle formats when it first came out because it was so bulky, it could heal a ton, and while it doesn't get Perish Body, it does get Cursed Body, which like every time you hit it with any move gives it a 30% chance of getting a disable. So your opponent would lock into their strongest move, you would heal up, and every time they attacked you, they'd have a chance to get disabled, so you could gradually wear them down. This was generally not considered to be very good in the official competitive format. However, Galarian Corsola does have a top 64 at Bochum Regionals in Sword and Shield. It was used alongside a number of other bulky Pokemon, including Corviknight, Gastrodon, Tyranitar, and Arcanine, and also Galarian Weezing was on this team. So like, I think it's a pretty neat team, and yeah, Galarian Corsola was there as well as another form of defense. So anyway, even though Cursola is not very good, Galarian Corsola is like at least usable and has a result, so it's only 7th on our list. Okay, coming in at number 6, I think is going to be controversial. The 6th worst ghost type Pokemon is Spiritomb. And I know that Spiritomb is iconic, and I personally like Spiritomb, and I think that it's really cool, but here's the cold hard truth. Spiritomb does not have a single recorded result on the most modern website. Now, I do need to specify that the current website that I use to keep track of stats and where the majority of Pokemon's results are recorded really only started getting updated after Sword and Shield, like starting in Sword and Shield, and the majority of data before then has been completely lost to time. I think that it is almost certain that Spiritomb had some results, like in the Generation 5, maybe even Generation 4 era, and even in Generation 6 and Generation 6+1, like there's probably some people who at least tried Spiritomb, but there's no way to access that data because like, yeah, we just weren't really preserving our tournament history in the same way that we are now. Major results like tournament wins will often be recorded, although even that's not the case for many tournaments from back in the day. So anyway, all that being said is that even though Spiritomb doesn't have any results, I still think it's a good enough Pokemon that it doesn't deserve to be further down on this list, even though some Pokemon further down have more recent results. The thing about Spiritomb, as many of you will know, is that it's one of the original Pokemon with 0 weaknesses, as prior to the Fairy type's introduction, Dark and Ghost combined to have 0 weaknesses. Spiritomb in many ways is actually quite similar to Galarian and Cursola. It has a low base HP but pretty decent defense and special defense stats, making it feel medium bulky. It's a Pokemon that is unlikely to go down in one hit, but is unlikely to live two strong ones. And also similar to the other Pokemon we've talked about thus far, it is extremely slow. This wasn't as big a problem for Spiritomb as it's been for the other Pokemon on our list, because it does get a number of priority moves, including Sucker Punch and Shadow Sneak. The thing is though, that while these priority moves are good and allow Spiritomb to attack before faster Pokemon, Spiritomb isn't the strongest Pokemon, and so like it wasn't a good enough reason to justify using this Pokemon. I know that a Pokemon with no weaknesses sounds pretty good, but the truth is that it's okay to have weaknesses. It's not okay to not contribute anything. And Spiritomb is really set up to be a supporting Pokemon with moves like Will-O-Wisp, maybe Trick, maybe you could use Hypnosis. It gets Nasty Plot as well, so you could use it as a setup threat. It gets some good supporting moves like Snarl and Icy Wind to support your team. But the issue is that like for these moves to be most effective, you want to be using them before your opponent attacks. And because Spiritomb is so slow, that's actually really difficult. Because Spiritomb's offenses are quite low and its defenses are relatively high, it's like awkward because you would like to use it as the supportive Pokemon with no weaknesses that you can use to gradually whittle down your opponent, but because it's so slow, like these supportive moves are not having the impact that you'd like for them to have. Now that being said, there is something good that I can say about Spiritomb, which is that in Scarlet and Violet it received a pretty major buff, which is access to the move Trick Room, which it did not have prior. With Trick Room, you can now justify using Spiritomb as a bulky Trick Room setter in a lower power level format. You can use its bulk to set up Trick Room and then use moves like Snarl and Will-O-Wisp to weaken your opponents while your sweepers do damage. So I think it is totally possible that we could see Spiritomb have a little bit of use going forward. Okay, coming in at number 5 is a Pokemon that I feel pretty bad that I have to put on this list because I like it a lot, but it doesn't have any results, and so it has to be here. It's Runerigus. So my thing about Runerigus is that Cofagrigus is one of my single favorite Pokemon. It was on my first ever tournament winning team, my first team that I actually entered a VGC event with, and I was so excited when I saw that it was getting effectively a new form. Runerigus is a little bit disappointing. It's a Ghost and Ground type Pokemon, which I would say is actually pretty cool. Ghost and Ground is a typing that has not seen a ton of success. Basically, there's 3 Ghost and Ground type Pokemon, and the best one of them is Palisand, who is not great, and again, many of you might not even know exists. And the other one is Galurk, who at the time I'm recording this is well, we'll talk about Galurk in a little bit. Anyway, Ghost and Ground don't have any good results like in their Pokemon, but I think that's more a factor of the Pokemon themselves rather than the typing being bad. Ground is a really valuable type as the only type that is immune to electric. Also having a rock resistance is really nice. And we've already talked about Ghost just being a good type generally. So combining 2 good types equals good type. It's not rocket science, right? So the issue with Runerigus is not the typing. I would also say that the issue with Runerigus is not its ability. It gets this very cool ability called Wandering Spirit, which basically acts like a skill swap whenever a Pokemon that makes direct contact with it hits it with a move. So if you're, I don't know, Incineroar uses knockoff into Runerigus, it would activate Wandering Spirit, and Incineroar would get Wandering Spirit while Runerigus would get Intimidate. This is a really interesting ability that is a variant of Cofagrigus' Mummy ability, which instead of switching the abilities would simply overwrite them. So like if a Pokemon made contact with Cofagrigus, then it would lose its ability and get Mummy. And so if you had Cofagrigus, sometimes you'd have a situation where all 4 Pokemon on the field had Mummy. You can't do that with Wandering Spirit, but the advantage of Wandering Spirit is that you steal the ability of whatever hits you. So if, I don't know, Mega Kangaskhan hits you, all of a sudden, like, not only are they losing Parental Bond, but you're gaining Parental Bond. There's a lot of potential positive implications with this ability, and I bet you could even do some interesting things where you attack yourself with it. It would not work with Wonder Guard if you're wondering. Wonder Guard has special conditions that don't allow it to get switched, but there are probably some other very interesting abilities that you could intentionally pass to your partner. But the thing about Runerigus is that it was really a victim of its timing. Runerigus has only been playable in competitive play in Sword and Shield. And the thing about Sword and Shield is that those games were defined by Dynamax. When a Pokemon Dynamax, it got doubled HP, all of its moves powered up, and also all of its regular moves were replaced with max moves. And importantly, no max moves make contact. So against the most important Pokemon in your opponent's team, Runerigus wasn't able to use its very cool ability. A lot of Pokemon depend on their abilities, so like in theory, stealing the ability of Pokemon that are really important in your opponent's team would be a good thing, but Runerigus was effectively not able to do this. The other thing holding Runerigus back is actually a very slight distinction in its stats. So Runerigus is very bulky on the physical side. It again has very low HP and actually has pretty good special defense. It's extremely slow, but this is actually a benefit because Runerigus is intended to be used as a Trick Room setter, and specifically it's intended to be used as a bulky Trick Room setter. So you tank a hit, you set Trick Room up, and then you start disrupting with moves like Will-O-Wisp. The tough part about Runerigus' stats is that it's a physical attacker. It has 95 base attack and 50 special attack. This is the opposite of Cofagrigus, who is a special attacker. And while it might not sound like a big deal, being a physical attacker as a Trick Room setter is just awkward. This is in large part because of the Intimidate ability. Cofagrigus and Runerigus are Pokemon that really want to set Trick Room up and then just stick on the field until they get knocked out, using moves like Will-O-Wisp to weaken the opponent or doing like bits of chip damage to help their partners pick up KOs. The thing is, if you get intimidated once or twice or you get burned, Runerigus suddenly isn't able to do actual meaningful damage. You can use moves like Nightshade, which does flat damage, but it's not so much flat damage that it's really worth using a lot of the time. And moves like Shadow Ball and especially Earth Power have such high base power that like it's worth using them even if you're not a super strong attacker, because the damage will add up, and also ground and ghost coverage is just pretty good offensively. I think it is absolutely reasonable to say that Runerigus could have success going forward. If it had been an early Scarlet and Violet, I think that people might have at least considered it, but only being playable in competitive play and Sword and Shield I think has really hurt it. I'm hopeful there will be a point where it is good. I do like it a lot. Okay, coming in at number 4 is Polteageist. Polteageist actually has one recorded result, which is a top 128 in Sword and Shield. So somebody brought it to a tournament. Polteageist is a bit of an awkward Pokemon. Its stats are kind of like baby Fluttermane if you look at them. It's very frail on the physical side. It's got okay special bulk and like good special attack, but it's relatively slow. It's actually kind of like a Fluttermane pre-evolution, like the way the stats are set up. The thing that makes Polteageist difficult to use is in large part its stats. Having a high special attack stat means you either want to be really fast or really slow so that you can be moving before your opponents using either Trick Room or just, you know, no speed control. And being right in the middle of like, or like the lower end of the middle, it's slow, but it's not slow enough. It's just awkward. It's made more awkward by the fact that Polteageist doesn't really have many good coverage moves. Aside from moves like Giga Drain and Dark Pulse and Psyshock, does it even get Psychic? If it does, I'm not seeing it. It just doesn't learn very many good moves. So you end up with a special attacker without many good special attacks. You can see the problem. A fun fact about Polteageist is that it gets a signature move called Tea Time, which causes all Pokemon in the battle to eat their berries. It's not very good, but it is funny. It's really funny because the Convergent Polteageist, which is Sinistcha, gets a really good signature move called Machigacha, which is just incredible, and like Tea Time is so much worse. Anyway, if you really like Polteageist, there is some things that you can do with it. Polteageist is a Shell Smash Pokemon, which is a move that lowers both of your defensive stats, but then gives you a +2 boost in your speed, special attack, and attack. So you can use it as a setup sweeper. I think this set was actually another one that was pretty good in single battles. And you actually can skip the setup altogether. You could do this kind of the bootlegged way because it gets the ability Weak Armor. Weak Armor gives your Pokemon 1 stage of decreased defense, but increases their speed by 2 stages every time they're hit by a physical move. And so what you can do is you can pair Polteageist with a Pokemon with the move Beat Up, which is a very weak dark type attack, which can hit up to 4 times. If you use Beat Up into your own Polteageist, you will give it, assuming you have all Pokemon available to attack, -4 defense, but +6 speed. And this will also do super effective damage. So you can use it with the weakness policy item, which will then double Polteageist's physical and special attack. You'd use this primarily with the psychic type attack Stored Power, which is the one exception to super strong moves that Polteageist gets, because Stored Power gets stronger with every stat boost that you have. The bad thing about using Beat Up into Polteageist is that the defense drops apply immediately. So each hit from Beat Up is going to do consecutively more damage. So like, even if you're using a relatively weak Beat Up Pokemon, you could still do like over 50% to Polteageist. It's certainly not an awful Pokemon. And like, I mean, a Shell Smash, you know, powerful special attacker it's not terrible, right? Especially it has healing from Giga Drain. So that's an option as well, but it's not a very good Pokemon. Okay, before we get to the top 3, let's talk about our honorable mentions. There's a fair few here that people are going to be expecting to see that are not present on this list. So I want to go through them. First, I've already mentioned this one, but Mismagius. Mismagius does not really have any tournament success, but Mischievous placed second at US Nationals back in 2013 as a bulky Trick Room setter. Banette is clearly one of the worst ghost type Pokemon, but some idiot won a regional with it, and that idiot was me. And so I felt like it's a regional champion. I can't justify putting it on the list, right? It was Mega Banette, to be clear. Mega Banette, by the way, has a sky high attack stat. That's the reason you should use it. My Banette had 0 damaging moves. It could do 0 damage. Stupid. Dusknoir. Dusknoir is not a very good Pokemon, although it did have success in the early days of competitive Pokemon, like 2009, 2008, somewhere around then. Despite that, it certainly was never going to be on this list because Dusclops was one of the single best Pokemon in early Sword and Shield, and actually for the duration of Sword and Shield, due to its monstrous bulk, using Ghost well as a defensive type because it just didn't have that many weaknesses, and access to the move Haze, which was very powerful against Dynamax Pokemon that were boosting their stats or lowering your stats, as well as Will-O-Wisp and Pain Split, which were also really good moves against Dynamax attackers, as well as the ability to activate your own partner's weakness policy. Dusclops was really good. Okay, here were the Pokemon that I was considering for slots 9 and 10. It was Frostlass and Golurk. Now, with full transparency, I am filming this video prior to Pokemon Champions releasing, and I do not even know the abilities of these Pokemon yet. I thought about including them as the 9th and 10th slots because, like, without their Mega Evolutions, they definitely deserve to be on this list. But the thing is that, like, I have a feeling that both Mega Evolutions are going to be viable, if not good, just looking at their stats. And it felt kind of silly to put them on this list knowing they were about to get a huge power buff. So I decided to mention them here instead. Like the base forms would have been 9 and 10, I think. But yeah, like given the fact that they now both have Mega Evolutions, I just didn't think that I could include them. Drifloon is a Pokemon that people might think is bad, but it was actually one of the best Pokemon in Sun and Moon. Maybe not one of the best, but was present on one of the best teams in early Sun and Moon. And actually throughout Sun and Moon had good success. This is because of its ability Unburden, which doubles its speed if its held item is consumed. Players paired this primarily with Tapu Lele, a super strong special attacker that set up the Psychic Terrain, which would then activate Drifloon's held item, the Psychic Seed, which would not only give it a special defense boost, but also activate Unburden, doubling its speed. Drifloon would then use its litany of strong supporting moves like Tailwind and Will-O-Wisp to support Tapu Lele, making it faster, effectively increasing its bulk. It could use Strength Sap to heal itself, although that might not have been present until Sword and Shield. I actually forgot about that. And doing good damage with Shadow Ball, which again, Ghost is a good offensive type. Blacephalon is a Pokemon I initially thought might be here because it's pretty commonly agreed as one of the worst Ultra Beasts, but it actually has a fair bit of success back in Sun and Moon, including multiple top 4s at regionals. One of them was actually a second. Configrigus is not a Pokemon with a ton of success, but it did win a regional and national level event. That was, again, me. It's one of my favorite Pokemon. It was like the centerpiece of my original VGC team. Couldn't put it on the list. Gourgeist and Trevenant are both Pokemon that I think maybe look bad at a glance, but like have both seen decent success. Gourgeist got second at an international back in 2020. It also won a regional back in Pokemon X and Y. That's actually not recorded on the site. And it also, I can see here, got second at a regional in 2016. Yeah, it was even used a little bit in 2016. Here's the top 8 at an Australian regional in 2016 as well. Definitely not a Pokemon that is always good, but a Pokemon where when it is good, it tends to be pretty annoying to deal with. Trevenant, I would say, is overall a bit worse than Gourgeist, but I did knock one out of Worlds in 2017, I believe. Yeah, in Top Cut. And I would say overall was a pretty good Pokemon back in like 2017, as well as even in X and Y. It saw a bit of success, getting 5th and 6th at Australian Nationals in back-to-back years. I feel like this might be a Pokemon with a regional win, but this one I'm blanking on. I'm not entirely sure, but it's certainly not a bad Pokemon, especially back in like the first years of X and Y and the first year of Sun and Moon. Pretty decent. I was at regionals this past weekend and I was talking with friends about like this problem, how I couldn't find 10 bad ghost types. And they mentioned Houndstone as a Pokemon that could be in contention, but I think Houndstone is just too good. Really good ability, really good signature move, has a top 32 at regionals despite not being out for very long. I just don't think I can put Houndstone on the list. Like I can't imply that it's a bad Pokemon. And the last one I wanted to mention here is Palisand. Palisand is a Pokemon that is, I think, probably a bit forgettable. Like if you didn't play much during Sun and Moon, you may like, it might be a Pokemon you don't think about very often. Palisand is a 3rd place at regionals in large part because of its signature ability, Water Compaction, which gives it 2 stages of defense boost every time it gets hit by a water move. There was a strategy that paired this with Smeargle, and Smeargle would copy Greninja's signature move, Water Shuriken, which hits multiple times, has priority, and is really weak when used by Smeargle. And the idea was you would Water Shuriken your own Palisand, which would hopefully hit at least 3 times and give it +6 defense, and would also activate its weakness policy, which would double its special attack. And then Palisand could like do a ton of damage with Earth Power and Shadow Ball, but could also heal itself with its signature move, Shore Up, which heals more if sand is up. Like that's pretty cool, right? I don't know if people even remember that it gets this. My friend Marcus actually back in the day had this incredible Palisand video on his YouTube channel. It's like I still think about it every time I think about Palisand. Anyway, that's all the ghost types I wanted to talk about in the honorable mentions. Again, like the ghost is really good. Like even the weird or bad ghost type Pokemon are still getting good results. So we have 3 Pokemon left, 3 Pokemon that are the worst ghost types, and frankly, they're all still pretty good. Starting with number 3, we're gonna talk about Oricorio's Sensu form. I'm pretty sure this is the ghost one's name. Sensu? Yep, Oricorio Sensu, the ghost one, which makes sense because this is the worst ghost type list. So Oricorio I've talked about before. Here's the thing about Oricorio, its stats are pretty bad. Its stats are actually quite bad. Like it's a Pokemon that you look at it and you think, well, like that can't be good, right? But the thing is that it also gets this very neat signature ability called Dancer. Dancer causes Oricorio to immediately use any dance moves used by you or your opponent, like in the same turn as they are used. It's one of the only Pokemon that can attack multiple times per turn without the help of Oranguru. Anyway, there's some pretty good moves that are dancing moves, like Quiver Dance is the best one, which gives you 3 stages of stat boosts. Being able to Quiver Dance and then use an attack in the same turn is very scary. There's also other moves like Fiery Dance and I mean, there's like Teeter Dance. I'm forgetting all of them, but I feel like Quiver Dance and Fiery Dance are typically agreed upon as the best ones. Victory Dance is a move as well now, though that's never used. Oricorio also gets the signature move move Revelation Dance, which changes type based on its form. So if it's a ghost type, Revelation Dance is a ghost type move. However, Revelation Dance actually got a bit of a buff in Scarlet and Violet. Now, if you Terrastallize, Revelation Dance changes to the type of your Terra type. Basically, this functions as a stronger form of Terra Blast because it's more usable beforehand. Oricorio Sensu has 2 top 64s in Scarlet and Violet, which is frankly pretty good for a Pokemon with not great stats. Its secondary typing of Flying gives it access to moves like Air Slash and Hurricane, as well as the very valuable supporting move Tailwind, which is just great to have on your team in general. It's hard for me to imagine Oricorio ever becoming too mainstream because even though the ability is so strong, the stats are just so bad. But I think the fact that it has 2 top 64s, which is 2 very respectable finishes, is a testament to the fact that even one of the worst ghost types is still usable and bringable to tournaments. That's like a real testament. Okay, there's 2 ghost types left. Neither of them have any results, and one of them is going to make you mad. It's number 2. It's Decidueye, or Deki if you're cultured. Decidueye, like, I know that people like Decidueye. It feels bad to put a starter Pokemon this high. I don't actually know if I think this might be the worst placing starter Pokemon on any one of these lists. Decidueye is just not good. It's another grass and ghost type. There's like so many of these things. I would say that of the Pokemon on this list, Decidueye is closest to Polteageist in the sense that they share a speed stat of 70, which is just like a really awkward speed point to be at in general. Let's say some good things about Decidueye first before I talk about how bad it is. Decidueye's typing is good. We've already established that grass and ghost is a pretty good type combination. Decidueye has a very cool signature move that is actually similar to Dhelmise's signature move called Spirit Shackle. It's actually the exact same thing as Dhelmise's move, except it's a ghost type instead of a steel type. These Pokemon are also added in the same generation, so it's probably coded similarly too. It's a good move. Like trapping your opponent in is good. Ghost is a really good offensive type. Great move. Decidueye also gets some useful priority moves such as Shadow Sneak and Sucker Punch. Yeah, it also gets Sucker Punch as well. It also gets a couple interesting coverage moves like Brave Bird is a good one. U-Turn is okay, though has bad synergy with Spirit Shackle, and it gets the good supporting move Tailwind. The stats are also overall, they're not so bad. Like the issue with Decidueye's stats is not that like they're awful in a vacuum. It has pretty good special bulk, decent HP, okay defense, and then there's the offenses and the speed. Like Decidueye is a mixed attacker. It has like about equivalent attack and special attack stats, which is actually really bad. You really want your Pokemon to have clear strengths and I mean ideally no weaknesses, but like, you know, clearly defined strengths is really good, and you just accept the weaknesses that you have. With Decidueye, it doesn't really have any clear strengths. It's not fast enough to work outside of most speed control outside of Tailwind maybe, and even then it's only so-so. It's not slow enough to be a good trick room attacker, and it's not strong enough to really be offensively threatening in an important way. It feels really unfair to compare what they gave Decidueye to what they gave Incineroar, given that they're both starters from the same generation, and even Primarina, who's a great water type, really dramatically outplaces Decidueye in pretty much every way, shape, and form. Like I feel like they spent all their time focusing on those two and then looked at Decidueye last and were like, yeah, just like give it whatever, right? Now there is an elephant in the room, which is that Decidueye got a Hisuian form, which is better. It's still not a great Pokemon, but it is meaningfully better. And I did say that for this video, I would only consider the best version of each form. However, I'm not considering Hisuian Decidueye here because Hisuian Decidueye is not a ghost type and is therefore not eligible for this list. If this were the grass type video, then yeah, but given that this is the ghost type video, it doesn't feel fair to say like, oh yeah, ghost type Decidueye is not present on the list because fighting type Decidueye is so good. The only redeeming thing about Decidueye is that I feel like it could get a result at some point because as a starter Pokemon, I think that people really like it. And also Rowlet is like one of the most beloved starter Pokemon from recent gen, like if you look only at the base form. So I feel like people will want to make it work and will want to use it. So I could see it having a bit of success in the future, but I think it's not a Pokemon that like if it were really ugly and hated would really ever see success. And that only leaves us one ghost type left, the single worst ghost type Pokemon who still frankly is not that bad. It's Rotom Ghost Form. Rotom Ghost Form feels kind of bad to put in the first slot because like, first of all, you can change its forms, but I included Oricorio on the list as well, so whatever. But also, here's the thing about Rotom Ghost Form. So Rotom Ghost Form is the Ghost Form. It's the original Rotom, it's Naked Rotom, whatever you want to call it, right? And then the appliances, all the different appliances you can put Rotom into, change type. The thing is that when Rotom was first introduced back in Diamond and Pearl, all the appliances were also electric and ghost. They changed it in Generation 5 to make the washing machine electric water and the oven electric and fire. Back in Generation 4, they were all electric and ghost, and they were pretty good. So it feels double bad to include Rotom Ghost here because like there were other ghost type Rotoms that it could be, but I did feel it was acceptable because first of all, there just aren't that many ghost type Pokemon to talk about. And second of all, I counted Rotom Ghost, I believe, on the worst electric type video as like its own worst form. And second of all, I said that I was only considering Pokemon in the evolutionary line, and technically their other Rotom forms are not evolution, so I'm counting it here. That being said, even Rotom Ghost, even Naked Rotom is not that bad. As the worst ghost type Pokemon, it is really not that bad. It does have 0 tournament results. The biggest issue with Rotom Ghost is that you would always prefer to use another Rotom form. While technically the naked form has an advantage over the appliances in that it is a little bit faster, in exchange for being barely faster, it is 80 points lower overall than any of the appliances, including a whopping total of 60 points in its defenses and 10 in its special attack. This is a huge concession to make that basically no advantage of naked Rotom like justifies over any of the appliances. Naked Rotom also has kind of a suspect move pool. It doesn't have very many good coverage moves. Like it can use Thunderbolt and Volt Switch and all the electric moves as well as Shadow Ball, but beyond that it's pretty lacking. Most of the time when people have tried to use regular Rotom, it's been as a like choice Pokemon, maybe choice Scarf, and using like Trick, for example, to try and disrupt the opponent. And if you're not using a choice item, you're probably going to use Will-O-Wisp, which is just a very good move overall. Recent generations have given it access to Nasty Plot, which is a good setup move, but the thing is that Rotom isn't quite fast enough even in its naked form to like justify using it as a setup attacker because it's also not that strong. If you're going to try and boost the stats of a Pokemon with bulk as bad as Rotom's regular form, you want to make sure that you can pick up KOs with it and also attack before your opponent can knock you out. And Rotom can't really do any of that reliably. It is definitely the worst ghost type, but it's also not so bad. Like the one advantage of using regular Rotom over the others is actually its ghost typing. The thing about regular Rotom being a ghost type is that you can give it items that don't allow it to protect, like Choice Specs and Choice Scarf, and you don't have to worry about moves like Fake Out, which are normally extremely good against any Pokemon that can't protect. There's downsides as well to being, a Choice Scarf ghost type, like the move Sucker Punch is a big one, but still it's a niche that Rotom can fill. Anyway, that's my list of the worst ghost types. I hope you see now why I said that this was so difficult and why they're just so good. They're just so good. I think Ghost might be the best type of the game. I've changed my mind. I think Ghost is broken. If you like this video and you want to see more, you should check out the video I made on the best ghost type Pokemon.